Hey friends, I'm Artifexus. You can call me Artie, and today we're diving into a warped wonderland of festive kitbashing to ask a simple question.
Does jolly old Saint Nick embrace the Ruinous Powers?
And joining me for this build is Wigsy, full title Inquisitor Wigsy to those on the Discord. Shall we get cracking?
Hell yeah!
Grab your brushes, your glue, and maybe a sacrificial offering or two, because it's time to warp the holidays in true Warhammer 40k style.
Let's get building Chaos Santa!
Hell yes.
We're making Santa from a combo of two units. One is the Gross Blightlord Terminators.
And the other is the Wolfguard Terminators. We figured they'd be similar enough to make mashing them together easier, but they both do possess something we're after.
The Nurgle boys have that belly, perfect for who we're building, plus loads of warped chaos buggery.
The first challenge was deciding which carapace to go for. It was a binary choice with two bellies, but was an important choice. We went for the chainmail one in the end.
The Wolfguard boys would give us that far north chilly vibe that we need for Santa. A bit less modern Santa, more like oldie worldy Santa, particularly with those furs. And we have plenty of choice of Wolverine style heads.
Indeed. Now, our biggest challenge here was deciding how much of his main body was Wolfguard or Blightlord. Namely because the shoulders, i.e. where you attach the arms, are on the front piece of the Blightlords and on the back piece of the Wolfguards.
Very inconsiderate.
So, I got about cutting out the chainmail to stick it to the front of a fully assembled Wolfguard torso. This was done because the back of the Blightlord in question was also his legs.
It was a super fiddly job, but it actually looked really good once we lined it up on the body. Even more so when we stuffed it with green stuff. It pretty much looked how we envisioned it.
Yeah, I was very chuffed with what we'd got so far.
Next, we went to Cape Town.
Why?
The Cape!
Oh, yes, the cloak and furs.
It's so cool. It's also where we wanted the Wolfguard upper body, so we could easily attach the cape.
Speaking of which, we knew we wanted to give Santa a Santa hat.
Go figure.
So I trimmed off the Terminator hood all the way back to the cloak line in order to ensure enough of his head would be exposed to fit said hat.
Which is what I was making, with green stuff.
And in the meantime, I was looking at weapon options. The Blightlords had this cannon-looking thing, and we were thinking...
Snowball cannon!
Exactly. I think it looks rather phallic, but well, what do I know?
Santa's hat is done and looking nifty. Now we need a staff. I thought a staff would lean into the oldie-woldy vibe that we wanted.
Thankfully, the Blightlords had a handy stick, but it was two hands too handy, so they needed a trim. And some additions.
Some time ago, Artie bought a load of random bits online, including a few goat head looking things.
Horned rats from the Skaven.
Goat, rat, they both eat anything. But I thought having these on top of the staff would look super cool.
And with a bit of prep and green stuff, they made it look really quite dope. Now it just needed a hand to stay up. Or a fist.
Or a power fist. It was another fiddly job though.
Fear not. After engaging in some thumb wars with the Blighter, I opened him up enough to hold onto the shaft. Yes, very mature.
But as usual, you had to decide you didn't like something while partway through though, didn't you?
Aye, with the snowball cannon, when combined with the staff, he just had a boring robot pose, you know? Like the Orc Mega Knobs.
To be fair, I can't argue with you there.
Makes a nice change.
But then I thought, what about Santa's sack? And thankfully the Wolfguards had an arm that was already carrying something like a sack. One quick snip and some rolled up green stuff later, there was his sack.
The pose his new arm was in made him look more like he's pushing his way through a blizzard, which is super dope. After a brief Nurgle invasion, we got about adding the other bits, such as the pauldrons. We went for one side Blightlordy and the other side Wolfguardian-y.
The bone spike thingy looks really cool.
We had a slight wardrobe malfunction though. The staff arm didn't agree with the draping cloak paw thingy, and getting it to cooperate was a pain. So we moved it.
Sometimes swapping shoulders really is key, and I think it looks better on this new side anyway.
After adding a horn for style points and some liquid green stuff for good measure, that's the body of our Santa built. It was clear that the majority of his chaosness would come from his paint job, but it's still cool to see him fully built up and...
Not quite. Aren't you forgetting something? The face fluff? The beard?
Okay, fairs. I went back to him to add the beard, and let me tell you, it was fiddly. Namely getting the tash part of the beard all lined up.
He looks like Wario. If it wasn't Santa, I'd have said, keep the tash.
It took a whole lot of poking and prodding with green stuff, but eventually the delicate bit around the mouth was more or less done. The main body of the beard was much more simple, and of course, it had to billow in the wind. Once the texture was done, there he is.
Now that's what I call Santa.
Before we move on, I want to give a huge thank you to my Patreon lieutenants, as well as all Patreon and YouTube members.
Thank you, and don't forget to like, comment and subscribe if you're enjoying this.
Indeed. Right, onwards to painting, which was a task I did, with Wigsy here as a TCC, or Tactical Colour Consultant.
Not to blow my own trumpet, but I have the better colour coordination of the two of us.
Yeah, I'm not even going to argue with that. As you can see, I began with Santa primed black, then began his primary colour, red.
Wasn't oldie woldy Santa green? Well, red is more striking colour, so as your TCC, I bade you to continue.
I did a couple of thin layers to keep it relatively smooth, and when combined with the white of his beard and trims, etc., he was really starting to look the part.
Painting those furs, though, looked like a bit of a nightmare.
Well, it became a process of layering, really. You know, getting the paint thin enough to sink down between the individual furs, then brushing over that layer, changing colours as you rise to the surface.
So a nightmare is what you're saying?
For someone of your patience, I guess so. I then added the silver of his chainmail and other metallic bits. Now, I have to point out one of the problems with an improvised kitbash like this one. It's difficult to paint them as they usually can't be sub-assembled. Sure, the bits you can't reach usually can't be seen, but it's still very annoying.
And very fiddly.
But after another Nurgle invasion and adding the sweet, sweet gold, I decided I wasn't gonna stand for it anymore. And I broke him.
Into 4 pieces.
I only meant to take his cape off, but he ended up losing his sack and coming apart at the waist.
Good thing he's into chaos worship, or that could have been fatal.
Fatal or not, it was a happy accident. He was much easier to paint this way. I then added wraithbone to places that would be bone or skin coloured, like his horn, his spike, staff headpieces, and of course, his face.
This is when I recommended some blue on the staff. Make it pop a bit. And not just any blue, a cool icy blue, which began with a base of the best colour in Artie's arsenal, Thousand Suns Blue.
It is a very sexy blue. And with the final touches done, that's all the base layers.
He looks very cool, but not super chaosy yet.
Fear not, that comes later. First, we've shading and stuff to do. After adding a couple of other base layers for good measure, I indeed shaded him. The biggest one of note is the furs, which got some Agrax Earthshade to lend it that dirty look.
It looks so good, I want to lick it.
I don't recommend it. The overall vibe I was aiming for was mildly dirty, but he's still pretty bright because chaos nonsense.
It sounds like the best excuse ever. Oh, I tried to make a sword, but it turned into a blob. But it's okay because chaos nonsense.
I won't even deny it because it's true. And of course, that brightness comes from the highlights. And I won't lie, highlighted reds and silvers, oh man, they're so good.
And the golds too.
Now, Santa's sack was a challenge. Yes. Point B, I am still no good at blending. I really need to get around to learning stippling, but in the meantime, I was just kind of trying to brush it out, no? Thankfully, the innate rough texture of Santa's sack made it easier to bluff my way through. After that, it was more or less just a case of going through and highlighting everything. Usually in 2 steps, the second of which being smaller but brighter, almost specular highlights if you would. The biggest challenge were those furs, specifically trying to avoid getting the highlight paint deeper into the cracks than they needed to be.
So I guess with the highlights done, now it's about adding the chaosness.
True that. When there isn't much physical deformity, symbolism and stuff is the way to go.
I love the chaos symbols you put on the cloak.
Trust me, no one's as impressed with how they turned out as I am, especially with a brush. I really need to get me a fine tip pen for these jobs. I also added a bit of blackness to Santa's eyes.
It really does make them look sunken. It's creepy.
And of course, what creature of the Ruinous Powers is complete without blood for the blood god? I added a big sigil of it to his sack, then the eyes of his staff along with tears of blood.
Edgy. Oh, you also added that soulstone blue to the gem in the staff, which gives it a kind of glassy look.
And with that, Santa himself is done. And all he needs done now is his base.
It had to be snow. Artie still doesn't have any snowy technicals or anything similar, so he used the same trick he did for my Inquisitor, sterling mud painted white.
Specifically Korax white, followed by something I didn't do for your model, shading it in Drakenhof Nightshade, followed by a light bit of white scar.
And it looks so good. I want to lick that too. After the rim is tidied, I mean, which is easy. Scrape away any excess and paint over it black.
Followed by a rather festive corn red pattern, just because I could. And with that, our boy in red is done.
Woohoo!
I am super pleased with how this dude turned out. His chaosness isn't like hardcore chaos, but I kind of like that.
Yeah, he's the more inviting side of the chaos coin, you know?
Exactly.
I also love that he's clearly a bit evil, but he's still brightly coloured.
And possibly a little bit off his rocker.
True.
Well, thank you so much, Wigsy, for helping me with this geezer.
No worries!
And thank you, viewer, so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed the build and got inspired to create this festive season. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe.
And join the channel's Discord. It's great fun there.
Thank you so much for watching. And remember, the Emperor is always guiding your brush.